I still remember the exact moment my father looked me straight in the eyes and told me he would not walk me down the aisle on my wedding day because my sister was uncomfortable. That single sentence shattered something inside me that I didn't even realize was still holding together. I stood there in my childhood living room, my wedding dress hanging in a garment bag behind me, my hands shaking, my throat burning, and all I could think was, how did we get here? How did my own father decide that my biggest day would revolve around my sister's feelings instead of mine? And before you judge what I did next, before you decide whether I was heartless or justified, tell me honestly, if you were in my place, would you have done the same thing? When I was growing up, everyone always said I was lucky. Lucky to have two parents who stayed married, lucky to have a roof over my head, lucky to have a sister only 2 years older than me. From the outside, my family looked stable, even loving. But what people didn't see was the quiet hierarchy that ruled our house. My sister, Emily, was always the sun, and the rest of us revolved around her. She was emotional, sensitive, dramatic, and from a young age, my parents learned that life was easier when Emily got her way. I was the opposite. I was the easy child. I didn't cry much, didn't throw tantrums, didn't demand attention. And because I was easy, I was also invisible. If Emily didn't like a restaurant, we didn't go. If Emily had a bad day at school, the entire house tiptoed around her mood. If Emily was upset with me, somehow it always became my responsibility to fix it, even if I hadn't done anything wrong. My father, especially, bent himself into knots to keep her calm. He used to say things like, "You know how your sister is," or, "Just be the bigger person." And over time, I learned that being the bigger person meant swallowing my feelings so Emily wouldn't have to deal with hers. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was strong, independent, not needy. I moved out for college, built my own life, and for a while, it felt like distance fixed everything. Emily and I were cordial but not close. My parents seemed proud of me in that distant, vague way, like they approved of my accomplishments but didn't really engage with my inner world. I learned to accept love in small, careful doses. Then I met Daniel. Daniel was the first person who ever looked at me and saw everything. Not just the version of me that kept the peace, but the one who felt deeply and quietly. He listened when I talked, really listened, and when I told him stories about my family, he didn't brush them off. He noticed how I always minimized myself, how I apologized too much, how I hesitated before expressing what I wanted. He never pushed me, never tried to fix me. He just stood beside me, steady and patient. When he proposed, it felt like stepping into a life where I finally mattered. We decided on a small but meaningful wedding. Nothing extravagant, but intentional. Every detail felt symbolic, especially the idea of my father walking me down the aisle. Despite everything, that tradition still meant something to me. I wanted, just once, to feel chosen, to feel like my father was proud to stand beside me, to publicly acknowledge me as his daughter on one of the most important days of my life. When I called my parents to tell them about the engagement, my mom cried happy tears. My dad sounded pleased, if a little reserved. Emily's reaction, though, was strange. She congratulated me, but there was a tightness in her voice. Later that night, she texted me a long message about how weddings were triggering for her because she was still single, how seeing me get married made her feel like she was failing at life. I stared at my phone, my heart sinking. Even then, I reassured her. I told her I loved her, that my wedding wasn't about comparing lives, that her time would come. I didn't realize that was only the beginning. As wedding planning progressed, Emily's discomfort seemed to grow. She had opinions about everything. The venue was too romantic. The guest list was unfair. The color palette made her feel excluded. Every concern somehow looped back to her emotions. My parents, especially my dad, started relaying her feelings to me like they were urgent matters that needed my attention. "Emily's having a hard time," he'd say. "Maybe you could tone things down a bit." I tried to compromise. I really did. I adjusted things where I could, not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid. Afraid of conflict, afraid of being labeled selfish, afraid of rocking the fragile balance that had defined my family for decades. Daniel noticed, of course. He gently asked me why my sister's feelings seemed to dictate so many decisions. I brushed it off, saying it was just stress, that things would settle down. Then came the conversation that changed everything. About 3 months before the wedding, my parents invited me over for dinner. It felt serious. My mom was quiet, my dad unusually stiff. Halfway through the meal, my dad cleared his throat and said we needed to talk about the ceremony. I felt a knot form in my stomach before he even finished his sentence. He told me that Emily had been really struggling with the idea of him walking me down the aisle. Apparently, the image of it made her feel raced and second place. He said she felt like it was a public reminder that I was moving ahead in life while she was stuck. I waited for him to say something like, "But this is your day," or, "She'll have to deal with it." He didn't. Instead, he said, "I think it might be best if I don't walk you down the aisle. It would make things easier for everyone." I laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because my brain refused to process what he was saying. I asked him if he was serious. He nodded. He said it gently, like he was offering a reasonable solution. He suggested alternatives. I could walk alone. I could walk with Daniel. I could have both parents escort me partway. Anything, as long as he didn't have to upset Emily. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I asked him why my sister's discomfort mattered more than my feelings. He sighed and said, "You're stronger than her. You can handle it." That sentence hit me harder than anything else. You're stronger than her. Translation: you're used to being hurt, so you can take a little more. I looked at my mom, hoping she would say something, anything. She just stared at her plate. I left that night in tears. I cried the whole drive home. When I told Daniel what happened, he was furious in a way I'd never seen before. Not yelling, not raging, but a quiet, controlled anger that scared me more than shouting ever could. He said it was wrong. He said I was being sacrificed to keep the peace. He said I didn't deserve that. For days, I went back and forth in my head. Part of me wanted to cave, like I always did. To tell myself it wasn't a big deal, that the marriage mattered more than the walk down the aisle. But another part of me, a part that had been ignored for too long, was screaming. It wasn't just about the aisle. It was about every moment I had stepped aside so Emily could be comfortable. Every time my feelings had been labeled less important because I was strong. I called my dad and asked to talk again. I told him how much it hurt me. I told him I had dreamed of that moment since I was a little girl. I told him that his refusal felt like rejection. He listened, but his answer didn't change. He said he loved me, but he couldn't do something that would cause Emily pain. He said he hoped I would understand. That's when something inside me shifted, not exploded, not snapped, just settled. Like a final piece clicking into place. I realized that no matter how much I explained, no matter how calmly or clearly I expressed myself, the outcome would always be the same. Emily's feelings would come first, mine would be optional. I told my dad I needed time to think. Over the next few weeks, I barely slept. I replayed conversations from my childhood, moments that suddenly made sense in a painful new light. I imagined my wedding day over and over, imagining the empty space beside me where my father should have been. I imagined looking out at the guests, knowing everyone would notice, knowing everyone would ask questions, knowing I would smile through it, because that's what I had always done. Daniel asked me one night what I really wanted, not what was easiest, not what would keep the peace. What I wanted, I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't used to asking myself that question. When I finally did, my voice shook. I said I wanted to feel chosen. I wanted to feel like I mattered. And that's where I'll pause this story for now, because this was the exact point where I had to make a decision that would change everything. This was the crossroads where I could either repeat the same pattern I'd lived my entire life, or do something I had never done before. Before I tell you what I decided, before I tell you how my father and sister reacted, and how everything unfolded after that. I want you to stop for a second and think about what you would have done if your own parent refused to stand beside you on your wedding day to protect someone else's comfort. Would you accept it? Or would you finally put yourself first? Part 2 is where I tell you what happened next, and trust me, it didn't go the way anyone expected. I want to pick this up right at the moment everything changed, because after all the thinking, all the sleepless nights, all the quiet crying in the bathroom so Daniel wouldn't hear me breaking down again, I finally made a decision. And it wasn't dramatic at first. It wasn't a grand speech or a slammed door. It was calm, almost frighteningly calm. I realized that if I kept choosing peace at the cost of my own dignity, I would wake up one day and barely recognize myself. So I decided that for once in my life, I would stop shrinking. I called my father and asked him to come over to my apartment. Just him. No mom, no Emily. When he arrived, he looked nervous, like he already sensed this wasn't going to be another conversation where I politely accepted disappointment. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table, and for a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I told him I had thought long and hard about what he said. I told him I understood that he wanted to protect Emily's feelings. Then I told him that I was done being the one who got hurt so that she wouldn't have to feel uncomfortable. He frowned, like I had spoken a language he didn't understand. I explained, slowly and carefully, that my wedding was not about Emily, that walking me down the aisle wasn't a competition or a ranking of daughters or a commentary on anyone else's life. It was a moment between a father and his child. I told him that by refusing, he wasn't just skipping a tradition, he was telling me, yet again, that my feelings mattered less. He sighed and repeated himself. He said he wished I could see things from his perspective. He said Emily was fragile. He said she took things harder than I did. And then, almost as an afterthought, he said, "You've always been so understanding." That's when I told him the truth. I told him that being understanding had cost me more than he realized. I told him how lonely it felt to always be the strong one, how exhausting it was to constantly make myself smaller. I told him that if he truly loved both his daughters, then he needed to show up for both of us, even when it was uncomfortable. He went quiet. For a moment, I thought maybe I had finally reached him. But then he said something that made my heart go cold. He said, "I'm sorry you feel that way, but my decision stands." Something in me hardened, not in an angry way, but in a resolved way. I nodded and told him that was his right. Then I told him that if he chose not to walk me down the aisle, he would not have a role in the ceremony at all. No special seat, no father-daughter dance, no symbolic gestures. I said it evenly, without raising my voice. He stared at me like I had slapped him. He asked if I was threatening him. I said no. I said I was setting boundaries. I told him that my wedding day would be about joy, not about managing other people's discomfort. I told him that I would not spend the day pretending everything was fine while quietly hurting. He left shortly after that, clearly upset. I sat alone at the table for a long time after he was gone, shaking, wondering if I had just blown up my entire family. When Daniel came home, I told him everything. He wrapped his arms around me and told me he was proud of me. I cried harder than I had in weeks. Word traveled fast. The next day, my mom called me in tears. She said my dad was devastated. She said Emily felt attacked. She said the family was falling apart over one small issue. I listened, and then I told my mom something I had never said before. I told her it wasn't small to me. I told her it never had been. She didn't know what to say to that. Emily texted me a long message that night. It was a mix of guilt, tripping, and self-pity. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this to her. She said I knew how sensitive she was. She said I was punishing her for being honest about her feelings. I read the message 3 times before responding. When I did, I kept it short. I told her my wedding wasn't about her, and that I hoped she could find a way to support me the way I had supported her my entire life. She didn't reply. As the wedding got closer, the tension thickened. Some relatives reached out, trying to mediate. Others stayed quiet, clearly choosing sides. I heard through the grapevine that my dad was telling people he felt pushed out. That hurt, because from my perspective, he had stepped away willingly. For once, I let the silence exist. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, my dad called again. His voice was different, softer. He asked if we could talk. I agreed, cautiously hopeful but prepared for disappointment. We met at a cafe. He told me he had been thinking a lot. He said Emily was still upset, but he was starting to realize that this situation had forced him to look at patterns he hadn't wanted to see before. He admitted, hesitantly, that he might have leaned on me too much over the years to keep things smooth. My heart pounded as he spoke. Then he said he wanted to walk me down the aisle after all. For a split second, the little girl inside me wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to grab that moment and never let go. But another part of me, the part that had finally found its voice, needed clarity. I asked him why he changed his mind. He said he didn't want to lose me. He said he realized that protecting Emily at my expense was still losing a daughter. I told him I appreciated his honesty. Then I told him something he clearly didn't expect. I told him no. The look on his face was a mix of shock and pain. I explained that I didn't want him walking me down the aisle out of fear or guilt. I wanted it to be a choice made freely, without resentment, without pressure. And more than that, I told him that I had already found another way to honor myself on that day. He asked me what I meant. I told him I would be walking down the aisle alone. Not because I had no one, but because I was choosing myself. The wedding day arrived faster than I expected. I was nervous, but underneath the nerves was a strange sense of peace. As I stood backstage, listening to the music begin, I felt something I had never felt before. Grounded. When the doors opened and I took my first step forward, there was no arm to lean on, but I didn't feel weak. I felt powerful. I could see people's faces as I walked. Some looked surprised. Some looked confused. My dad sat in the front row, his eyes wet, his hands clasped tightly. Emily wasn't there. She had decided not to attend, saying it was too hard for her. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for that. When I reached Daniel, he took my hands and whispered that I looked incredible. The ceremony was beautiful, simple, honest, joyful. And when it came time for the reception, something unexpected happened. Instead of a father-daughter dance, Daniel and I shared a quiet moment where he thanked me publicly for choosing myself, for choosing us, even when it was hard. The room erupted in applause. I saw my dad wipe his eyes again. In the weeks after the wedding, the dust slowly settled. My relationship with my parents changed. It became more honest, more cautious, but also more real. My dad apologized, truly apologized, not with excuses, but with accountability. He told me he was proud of me, not for being easy, but for being brave. Emily and I didn't speak for a long time. Eventually, she reached out. Our relationship is still fragile, but it's no longer built on me sacrificing myself to keep her comfortable. Looking back now, I don't regret my choice. Not for a second. I didn't ruin my wedding. I reclaimed it. I didn't break my family. I exposed cracks that were already there, and in doing so, I finally gave myself permission to matter. So that's my story. It's messy, painful, and complicated, but it's real. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us end up being the ones we have to stand up to. And sometimes, the most powerful walk you'll ever take is the one you take on your own terms. If you were on my side, if you think I did the right thing by finally putting myself first, hit that like button. Subscribe for more real, raw stories like this one. And please, tell me your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments. I read every single one. I'll see you all in the next story.